Summary. Izuku is 11 the first time his hands are stained. He's 16 the next. Chapter 1. Izuku is 11, bordering on 12, when he and Katsuki bury a body together. Or at least, they bury what's left of the bloodied mush and bag of bones that could pass as Midori Hisashi if you'd seen him 2 hours prior. They bury the murder weapon, a baseball bat, alongside the body, and it hits them at 2 o'clock in the morning in the off-limits woodland behind the park what's happened. Midoriya Izuku is covered in blood from the tips of his shoes to his elbows. His face is also splattered with the stuff, and Bakugo Katsuki has his shirt soaked with blood when they hit the river a couple meters from where the body is buried. They let the shovels float away down the river into where it will eventually meet the canal. In that moment, they wash as much blood from their skin as possible, and let the dark water turn even darker as they soak themselves to the bone. Neither of them cry at first, but Izuku feels like he can't breathe because his chest has never been so light, and has never been so wondrously empty because he's free. He and his mother are free. Katsuki holds his childhood friend to his chest as he eventually devolves into hysterical laughter, which quickly turns into sobs of relief, and he squeezes his hands into the ruined All Might sleep shirt when he remembers the scene he walked in on. But it's 2 o'clock in the morning and they've buried a body together, so Katsuki pushes the sight away from his mind and closes his eyes as he hides his face in familiar green curls, knowing that his auntie and Izuku are safe now. 11-year-old quirkless boys are weak. Weaker than the average 11, almost 12-year-old at the very least, and so nobody suspects Izuku as having anything to do with his father's disappearance. Midori Hisashi, as far as the police are concerned, abused his wife until she passed out and sent his son into a dissociative state before someone, possibly the local vigilante who's taken to more brutal methods lately, came in and utterly wrecked the man before dragging his body out, never to be seen again. It's considered a homicide case from the offset, given the amount of blood that's found in the kitchen. The police also come to the conclusion that the vigilante moved Izuku to another room, and that's why he doesn't have any blood on him or his clothes. All the leads they think they can concoct die out in days, because everyone knows 11-year-old little boys don't have the upper body strength to take a baseball bat to a full-grown man and hit and keep on hitting until he hits the ground, and then take the bat to the down man's head and keep going until brain matter is hitting the floor. How dare he touch his mother? How dare he touch her and hurt her and think Izuku would continue to let it happen? It's fine to hurt him, but what made him think he could touch his mother? But when they run out of leads, they talk with the Midoriya child, because they have evidence he was there that night, and though they hate to think about it, there isn't enough evidence beside the child-sized footprint in the blood spatter and Midoriya Inko's testimony that Midori Hisashi threw her son to the floor before he turned his unbridled fury on her. They take the boy in, sit him down away from his mother with her consent, and ask him what happened that night. And Izuku tells them the truth. He doesn't know. All the 11-year-old, 12 and 3 weeks, knows is that his father was hurting him, and then he was hurting his mother, and then Katsuki was there and making sure his mother was alive and that he was alive. He spent the rest of the night with the youngest Bakugo and called an ambulance for his mother, and cried in fear of what would have happened because of what happened with his father. The thing is, though, Midori Izuku is 11. He's just witnessed his father nearly murder his mother after being abused by the man for most of his life, so nobody questions it when his story is choppy. It's a traumatic experience and he's a child. And the thing is as well, is that Midoriya has perfected the art of lying by telling the truth. Katsuki remembers the frantic way Izuku had been breathing when he'd called him that night. The way he could see the tears bubbling in his eyes, and all Katsuki could think was that something had happened to his auntie, because he and Izuku only had each other's phone numbers because their mothers insisted on it. They hadn't truly been friends in a long time, but still, Katsuki knew about Izuku's father. He'd been the one to drag the brat to the nurse's office, which is what sparked the school finally putting him on a potentially abusive household watch. 11 years too fucking late. But Katsuki knew what his aunt's husband was like, and so when Izuku called him crying, he just assumed the worst. The worst didn't measure up. I killed him, Kachan, I just killed somebody. And Katsuki doesn't really remember what went through his head then. He just remembers hanging up before throwing up at the thought of happy, bubbly little Izuku with blood in his hands, before immediately calling back and saying he'd be over in minutes. He didn't bother to tell the hag where he was going, when he'd be back, or what was going on. because Bakugo's protected family, and if Izuku felt like he'd had to murder his father, then to Katsuki it was perfectly justified. Another thing Katsuki didn't really remember about that night. The only thing he truly remembers in perfect clarity about that night is seeing Izuku standing over a bloody pulp, blood drenching him as he stood, chest heaving and splintered baseball bat clutched in his hand. When the boy had turned around, Katsuki came face to face with something that wasn't entirely human. The feral look on the blood-splattered face made his chest freeze, as his heart decided whether it wanted to keep beating in the few moments it would take what was left of Izuku to rip it from his chest, before tears replaced blood and Izuku blubbered as he said he didn't know if his mother was breathing. Was whose idea it was to bury the body. One of the few things that Katsuki somewhat remembered was Izuku saying he should turn himself in, and Katsuki also remembers saying that was stupid and that he couldn't become a hero if he went to prison, because they were children and all they knew was that Izuku had done something bad, but for good reasons, and sometimes bad actions led to good things, but Katsuki didn't know which of them had suggested they bury the body instead of just leaving it and lying about it. Aizawa knows that something isn't right with Midoriya and Bakugo. Not in a they're traitors or villains in disguise kind of way, but in the there's a mountain of unresolved childhood trauma kind of way, because those two are the only students who haven't recoiled from the training simulation yet, and the students had to sign an agreement for this shit. It's brutal. The building the class is making their way through has been designed to look like the scene of a massacre. Floor to ceiling there's blood trails, fake organs and horrifically realistic fake brain matter and tendons scattered so that the students will occasionally stumble upon what little is left of the bodies. There's also the artificial smell of rot and human excrement, given that the body releases all of that upon death, and now also the smell of vomit, given that he's seen more than one of his students throw up. It's supposed to prepare them for the worst kind of situation a hero can find themselves in. A gruesome murder isn't something heroes often stumble upon or get called in for, but it happens, and rescue situations will have situations much easier to handle than this. It's the simulation equivalent of throwing his kids in at the deep end. But Midoriya and Bakugo are unfazed. They almost look at the forefront of the crowd, leading struggling students through the horror maze that makes up the assignment, like they've seen worse. Like to them, this is so clearly fake that it doesn't even register to them that they should be pretending that it's affecting them. And they aren't pretending it isn't because Aizawa knows what his problem child looks like when he's pretending. Midoriya Izuku truly doesn't care what the state of the building is. It isn't affecting him. Bakugo is much the same, but there's something in the void of Midoriya's eyes that tells him that whatever has caused their nonchalance is much closer to home for the problem child than his other student. Aizawa knows he'll have to look into that. Midoriya's father was murdered, possibly right in front of him. Bakugo was the one to find the boy with his unconscious mother's body covered in blood as gore covered the kitchen. That explains basically nothing and creates so many more questions. Muscular stands before Izuku. He's a pulsating wall of muscle and he reeks of death. Kota has stood behind him, clutching his leg and crying because this man killed his parents. This man killed his mother and father and he doesn't even care, because now he's going to try and kill Kota because he wants to. Izuku knows he's pushed a fair bit of that night down, hidden the truth of what he did even from himself. All he properly remembers of killing his father is being so angry and wanting to make sure the man never laid a hand on him or his mother again, and he remembers his father being on the floor unable to scream because Izuku had bashed the bat straight into his throat after knocking him back. And it starts to get blurry as he thinks about how he brought the bat down again and again on his head because that was the only way an 11-year-old knew how to kill someone. To hurt their head enough. But despite how much he's pushed down, Izuku remembers the weight of the baseball bat in his hands, the rage and anger, and above all else, he remembers the desire to make sure that his father never laid a hand on a hair on his mother's head again. The same desire runs through him now, and this time Izuku is older. He's no longer a scrawny 11, almost 12-year-old with a baseball bat. He's 16, he has a quirk, and he's once more filled with a red haze to get rid of the danger. Kota, whatever you do, don't open your eyes till I tell you to, okay? Kota nods against his leg, and he pushes the little boy into the cave he'd been cowering in before, eyes tightly shut and hands covering his ears. Smart boy. Don't want him to see your last moments, boy? Muscular is terrifying. He's Kota's boogeyman and a murderer. The thing is, Izuku's also a murderer. He smashed his boogeyman's head in with a bat at age 11. He knows how easy they go down once you aren't scared of them. Don't want him to see yours. And with that, Izuku shuts down and lets the feral, angry thing that is the only thing his father passed down to him take over. Muscular will not lay a hand on Kota, and for just enough time for it to matter, the blonde man flickers into a very much alive Midoriya Hizashi and everything consumes him. When he calms down, the mountain is quiet, barring the crackle as the forest below them burns, and Muscular is a twitching mess of blood on the floor. His chest is concave, a boot mark already forming on his exposed chest. Izuku feels the blood running down his skin, soaking into it and staining him once again. Muscular's every breath is a rattle, testament to his broken ribs, and he can't seem to move his arms or legs. He isn't dead yet, but if left here, he might be in an hour or two. Who knows how long it will take paramedics to get to him, if any are even called. Izuku ignores him and moves to the cave, padding in and scooping the little boy into his arms. Kota whines when the stickiness of blood and the smell of it hits him, but faithfully keeps his head buried in his shoulder and doesn't even ask if he can look. Smart boy. Izuku spends a few moments looking down at Muscular, watches as his hands twitch and how he tries to force out his last words. But Izuku has a trend going on, and he can tell he's crushed the man's windpipe. It'll be a slow, painful death. An ambulance and immediate medical attention might save his life. The last thing Muscular sees is a blood-splattered boot rushing at his face. Katsuki has seen that look on Izuku before. He's seen him covered in blood with that look on his face before, and he knows his childhood friend has killed somebody. Knows that it wasn't pretty and it wasn't quick. But Katsuki doesn't care because Bakugos protect their family, and Izuku would only kill someone if it was justified. So he keeps close to Izuku, grasps his bloodied, shaking hand in his own, even as the rest of the extras in his useless protection vanguard stare in horror. Izuku is much more responsive than he was when he was 11. Katsuki's seen him at his worst. This doesn't even compare. You don't think Deku had to... You don't think he had to kill someone, do you? Round Cheeks thinks she's quiet, but she isn't, and the steady void in Izuku's eyes wavers for half a second, and so Katsuki squeezes the hand holding on his like a lifeline and keeps his own eyes forward. The two of them have buried a body together. Katsuki may seem like he hates him, but he will stand by his side through anything. Aizawa sits in the hospital room watching his student watch him. The heart monitor next to Midoriya shows that he's perfectly calm. He's not worried or angry or any of the expected reactions in the slightest. He just looks numb. He's trying to come to terms with the fact that his student killed his supervillain, and his student looks like he needs a coffee to wake up properly. Of course, there's no real evidence that it was Midoriya who killed Muscular. The body was too burnt in Dabi's blue flames to really give a concrete cause of death, but Midoriya had turned up after saving Kota from the villain, covered in blood and looking as numb as he does now. Something, horrific and refusing to be silenced, says that this isn't his student's first kill. There's too many options surrounding that thought, though. For him to assume that Midoriya Izuku was a traitor, one stands out the most, though. What happened to the body? The statute of limitations runs out next month. It's calm, and still the heart monitor remains steady. Ask them. It should be horrifying. The almost outright admission that his student killed his own father, but it's vague enough that Midoriya could be confirming being the one to kill the man, all the way to watching someone else drag the body away. After all, the main theory for the case is that it was a local vigilante hearing a child scream for help, ignored by neighbors for his Christmas, which is something they need to talk about, and saved because that's what vigilantes did. They helped the ones the heroes forgot about. Kachan had nothing to do with it, though. Everyone thinks he did, but he didn't do anything to Hizashi. Kachan isn't like that. He doesn't mean to be as violent as he is. Auntie just didn't teach him right. The monitor remains calm, but Aizawa is anything but. Later on that day, when he gives a conference to the whole of Japan and listens to them call his student a villain in the making, a savage and a danger to society, he thinks back on Midoriya Izuku. Sunshine Incarnate, All Might's favourite student, the happiest, most bubbly student Aizawa has ever dealt with, who had sat in a hospital bed and indirectly confessed to murder before saying that his childhood friend hadn't ever meant to be as violent as he was. Auntie just didn't teach him right, rings through his ears as he watches the media dogma. His words of retaliation are vicious, scathing. Every child is worth saving, and Bakugo is violent in excessive amounts, but he can learn, he can apologize and grow. Besides, the kid's seen too much for Aizawa to let him go. Someone needs to keep an eye on him, and from the looks of it, Bakugo and Midoriya are each other's anchors. His students are good kids. His students deserve to learn and grow, and Aizawa commits verbal homicide because the last thing a kidnapped student needs to hear is that he is undeserving of being saved. Auntie just didn't teach him right. Those words consume him. Katsuki is chained to the chair, muzzled like a stray fucking dog, and all he can smell is smoke and cheap liquor. He thought he'd forgotten what the combination smelled like. He hasn't smelt it since he was 12. Dobby and the bar he's trapped in serve as a harsh reminder, though. Katsuki has never regretted burying the bastard with Izuku, has never regretted washing away the evidence and lying to the truth with Izuku to keep him safe. Because sometimes some people won't stop hurting others until someone stops them, and Izuku's always had a temper. Nobody would ever believe you if you told them, of course, because Izuku's a lovely little boy plagued by quirklessness or a bone-breaking quirk, but Katsuki was Izuku's best friend until they were 6, and then he's been his closest friend, because best friend implies there's a hierarchy, and Izuku is passing acquaintances only, and then Katsuki after the age of 6, so that kind of thinking makes no sense, especially when Izuku is the only real friend Katsuki has. Ever since, and Katsuki knows that sometimes Izuku gets so angry he cries, and sometimes he gets so angry that he drags little red nail lines into his arms because he wants to hurt the other kids when they're mean, and they won't listen to his words, so maybe if he uses his fists. But Izuku has always refused to use violence first. It's why, when he'd been called up and told that Izuku had killed his father, he didn't even question it. Izuku would only do that if he had no other choice, because the other boy hated giving in to his anger. Not like Katsuki, who liked how freeing being angry was. Katsuki loved being able to scream his frustrations, being able to feel the heat of anger rush through him when he felt at his lowest, and maybe it wasn't always healthy, but his own mother had always proved that anger was easier than sadness or pain. So no, Katsuki doesn't regret helping Izuku get away with murder, but he regrets forgetting what smoke and cheap liquor smells like because it twists his stomach. He loses what regret he has when he throws up, and it dips through the holes in the muzzle and onto Handjob's feet, though. The bastard shrieks, cursing him out, yelling about how disgusting it is, and the familiar allure of anger boils beneath his skin like a drug. Katsuki can't help but laugh. God, he's trapped somewhere between scared shitless and boredom. He shouldn't be laughing, but he is, and it's freeing. What the fuck are you laughing about? Huh, Plasty? Dobby pulls his stool over, sits on it, and crowds his face as he asks. He yanks on the muzzle just to piss him off. Katsuki is too hysterical to truly be pissed off. Just thinking about the fact that this bar smells exactly like my uncle. It throws the villain off, so he continues. Well, like he used to. Tell me who burnt you, Dobby. I know what those burns are. The villain's eyes widen, and his skin flares with blue fire. The man jolts back, realizing his quirk had been set off, and he storms off. Hiding the shaking of his hands, and Katsuki leans back and closes his eyes, thinking about the fact that Izuku has a patch of skin between his shoulder blades that's scarred over that looks close to the shade of Dobby's scars. Of course, Izuku's is much less distinct than Dobby's, but what can you expect when the perpetrator spits flames? He can't help but wonder if Dobby killed the bastard who did that to him. Alright, Midoriya, let's talk. What do you want to know? How many people? Izuku watches Aizawa, there in the safety of his own flat, the one he killed his father in. He can still see where the blood had splattered on the walls even years later, and Izuku knows the police can't do anything now because the statute of limitations has run out. Cut by several decades because the police thought they had the answer, and nobody wants to find the killer of a child abuser anyway. But Izuku also isn't stupid. None you can prove. His teacher looks at him, trying to understand him, and moves on to the next question. What involvement did Bakugo Katsuki have? Kacchan only turned up that night because I phoned him when I couldn't tell if my mother was breathing. Izuku has long perfected the ability to lie by telling the truth. He and Katsuki made a promise that night. Everything goes to the grave. Chapter 2. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. Auntie's going to be okay. You did the right thing. To the paramedics who have arrived at 3:30 in the morning to the scene of what looks like a bodiless murder to find 2 children and an unconscious woman, the words sound comforting. Children putting themselves together as they try to understand what on earth they'd witnessed. Too young to truly process what they've stumbled upon. Izuku nods, squeezing Katsuki's hand and trying not to think about the fact that he was screaming for hours, for years, for anybody to help him. And he's trying not to think about how if he just grabbed the bat and given it earlier, his mother would be fine. can't change the past, Izuku. We promised. Now come on, the old man's dragging us to the hospital. Nothing innocuous in the slightest. Two traumatized children clinging to each other and forcing each other to keep on going. A friend keeping a friend calm in such a stressful situation is commendable. It's almost impossible to imagine that the aforementioned promise was made standing over the grave of a man one of the children had murdered, but both children were good at lying through telling the truth. Okay, Katja. Aizawa keeps an almost unhealthy watch over Midoriya after the events at Kamino. He trusts that his student won't go on a murderous rampage, but he can't help but feel like he should be doing something. For one crime, there's legally nothing he can do. The time which to pin anybody down for it has passed, and nobody would believe him without evidence that it was Midoriya Izuku and the other. Aizawa knows Midoriya killed Muscular. He knows, but the body was practically bone and charred flesh when they'd found it, left to rot in the aftermath, and already a festering mess of flies by the time anybody bothered to comb the forest for evidence. Not to mention the only witness, a 6-year-old boy, says that Midoriya saved him and nothing else. He can't do anything without evidence, and for two seemingly unprompted murders, there's so much meticulous care put into leaving no trail. It unnerves him, thinking about how long little Midoriya Izuku must have thought about what he'd do if he ever killed his father to keep it so well hidden. But there's nothing he can do, and the kid won't talk. Aizawa has tried, but all he gets is half-truths or outright omissions. It seems Midoriya Izuku has perfected the ability to lie with truths. There's only one thing Aizawa actually knows with full certainty in this series of events. Midoriya Izuku has killed at least 2 people in acts of presumed self-defense, and he won't talk about it being the first one, and the second one being that Bakugo Katsuki is involved, but so well removed from the situation by Midoriya that Aizawa wouldn't have even guessed if Midoriya hadn't mentioned him. Regardless, he keeps an eye on the kid. Not because he thinks he'll rampage, but because he can't comprehend how he's just moving on each day to the next without a hint of remorse. Usually child killers are ultimately criminally insane or so drowned in guilt that they shatter. Aizawa isn't sure if Midoriya fits either of those, and it scares him because he can't be there to pick up the pieces if he doesn't know where they'll land. But there's something that interests him in a morbid way about everything, and that's despite it being practically an open fact that Midoriya's father is dead. When asked about his father, Midoriya gives one explanation. I don't have one. Which is a fact. He doesn't have one. The man's dead, not to mention Midoriya Hisashi may have never been a father in Midoriya's eyes. And usually this would be enough to deter students, and obviously Aizawa can understand not wanting to talk about a dead relative, but surely he should say he's dead rather than making it appear like he's simply distanced. Once more, looking into anything Midoriya Izuku answers nothing and raises even more questions. Hey Deku, you never saw what your dad did for a living? Katsuki tries not to stiffen as he listens in on Izuku and the extras' conversations. Izuku hadn't properly gone back to normal after what happened with Muscular a couple of weeks ago, and Katsuki knew that the others might not have noticed it, but he certainly had. He didn't think Izuku would do anything stupid. After all, to an outsider he seemed perfectly normal, but the other boy was more tense than usual. He'd seen him curling in on himself and hiding his fist in his chest more than once in the past few days alone, which was something Izuku only did when he got angry, but there was no reason as to why he'd be angry. Which is where his concern came from. Out of the two of them, Katsuki was the one quick to anger. Izuku buried it and cried and screamed before he ever thought about hurting people. So he should have fled tears or a screaming match before he felt like he had to hide his fists from people. He used to work in the finance district. The void is back in his green eyes. Katsuki doesn't remember ever coming up with the name Void. He just knows that it's the look Izuku gets when he starts to shut down. Like his eyes have put up a little sign saying, "Current occupant is out right now, come back later." And generally when Izuku has his void, it means one of two things. He's thinking about his father or he's blocking stuff out. Right now, Katsuki can only presume he's trying to block out everything he can in regards to his father. Void Izuku isn't the most agreeable of people. Colder and slower to respond, but also quicker to snap if you press the wrong buttons. Something Katsuki learned by accident when they were younger. And when he sees the look in the boy's eyes, he doesn't even pretend like he's listening to Kirishima, and gets up and starts to walk towards the group. He's quick to snap, and when Izuku is angry, he doesn't have a filter. They've promised to take everything to the grave, and Bakugos protect their family, so if it means he has to censor Izuku, it's what he has to do. In terms of legality, Katsuki has nothing to gain by keeping things secret. The statute of limitations ran out, and he could always spin it as a near instance Izuku coerced him into helping if legal trouble ever emerged from it. But Katsuki watched Izuku stumble through the first 11 years of his life with bruises and burns Katsuki never gave him, and that every other adult in their lives besides Auntie was a blind out. Keeping a secret has never been about gaining something, it's about pettiness. Midori Hisashi had a stranglehold on the other two Midoriyas for years. He controlled them like they were puppets, and he held their strings, and nobody would help until it was too late, and something horrible had to happen. And Katsuki knows that if it got out at the time, something horrible would happen to Izuku, so they decided to take the power away from Midori Hisashi. Perhaps in any other situation he'd still have power over the remaining two Midoriyas. Maybe if it hadn't been Izuku who'd killed him, the dead man would still have control over the two, even in the afterlife, hovering over them and leaving them shaking messes who couldn't hold themselves up after their strings had been cut. But Izuku had control now, over himself and over his father. Nobody would find Midori Hisashi's body. Nobody would know what happened unless Izuku wanted them to. It was petty, but it was cathartic. And Izuku would hate himself if in a moment of weakness he let someone take that away from him. Some days Katsuki felt that the feeling of control was all that kept the other boy going. That and seeing Auntie each and every day smile happier and happier as he became himself again. The two of them had never addressed what Midori Inko knew about what they'd done, but they knew she had at least solidified suspicions. Used to? What does your father do now, if you don't mind me asking, Midori? Four Eyes gets the word out just as Katsuki makes it into Izuku's line of sight. He's looked through for half a second before Izuku manages to pull himself back into his own head. Deku, don't forget what you promised me. You've got 5 minutes. Those words successfully anchor Izuku in his own head, and Katsuki walks off, knowing that the extras will assume it's a promise of training. Nobody needs to know the truth. You promise? I promise. I'm never going to let him control me anymore. He's dead. I killed him, so he can't control me anymore. He can't do anything to me anymore, so he can't hurt me anymore and control me. I promise I won't let him. His mother wasn't supposed to be home that night. Her shift was supposed to keep her at the hospital until midday the next day. She wasn't supposed to come home halfway through Hisashi, lifting him off the floor by his neck. She wasn't supposed to see him going blue in the face as flames threatened to permanently blind him and kill him. Midoriya Inko was never supposed to see the extent to which her husband hurt her son. She was just supposed to see the aftermath that Izuku let her see before she tried desperately to get people to listen to this time. They wouldn't, because nobody cared about quirkless children. If anything, he was doing it for attention, or he deserved it. Even though they both knew nobody would care. She wasn't supposed to use her quirk to drag his injured body from his father's chokehold, set him on the ground, and then get in her husband's face, threatening to call the police because she'd caught him, and she wasn't supposed to threaten to leave Hisashi. But she was home that night. She saw what her husband was really capable of, and she got in his face, screaming with all the rage in her body, telling him she was going to call the police. She was going to take Izuku, and they were going to move far away where he'd never be able to hurt her baby ever again. Izuku had been sitting on the floor, trying to remember how to breathe when she'd done all that, and he'd been unable to breathe as he watched his mother's head hit the countertop as she was pushed over, and he'd scrambled to his feet, screaming for his father to stop when he brought a foot down on her 3-month stomach. But he'd been ignored, and all Izuku knew was that he needed to get his father to stop. But he didn't know how, and so he'd been stuck, frozen in horror as he listened to his mother scream, as she spat curses and painful shouts alike, until his father had turned his back to him completely, to start screaming as he hit her, so his wife couldn't look away from him as he told her everything that he thought about their useless, run-to-waste of space excuse of a child. He'd stood there and watched as she begged him to stop, to just leave her and her son alone, and Hisashi had said that he wouldn't, that this was only the beginning, and that broke something inside of Izuku. So he'd slunk out to the kitchen, still uneasy, and tried to breathe, and he'd found the baseball bat his mother had bought him only the day prior, and he picked it up and gripped it tighter than he'd ever held anything before making his way back to the kitchen. His mother was a bleeding heap on the floor, chest moving but unconscious, and yet Hisashi, he wasn't stopping. And all Izuku could think about was that he wanted it to stop. He wanted everything to stop, and nobody was coming to help. No heroes were coming to steal them away and protect them. No neighbors were going to call the police or try and intervene. Nobody was going to make it all stop. Everything needed to stop. Why wouldn't anybody make it stop? The first swing was on instinct. Hisashi hadn't noticed him, and he was hunched over. Izuku had just wanted to get him away from his mother. That's all he wanted to do. Get the man away from his mother, and then maybe he'd stop when he saw that Izuku was going to fight back, or at least he'd leave his mother alone. But he'd put more into the swing than he meant to, and when his father was hit, he tumbled away as expected, but then he'd hit the floor, and Izuku could feel red building in the corner of his eyes when he got a proper look at how his mother was splayed on the floor, bleeding and bruised. You fucking little brat! It's unclear, even now, and especially then, what expression he was wearing, but whatever it was shut his father up, and for once in his life, the world seemed quiet. No more buzzing in the back of his brain, screaming at him to do something. No more whispers about how he was a useless Deku. One thing that is unclear is how his father got on his back when he landed originally on his knees, but Izuku hadn't cared about unimportant details like that at the time. All he'd cared about was that everything was starting to stop, and his father was on the floor, and Izuku had a bat, and if he hurt his father enough, it just might make him stop. After all, words never worked with people. Just like his father or Tsubasa, you had to show them. Leave! He brought the bat down on his father's chest, and the man wheezed, trying to bring his arms up to grab the bat, but Izuku smashed his bat into them next, creating a sickening crunch. Her alone! What connected with the soft flesh of a neck, and the choking sound his father made his blood boil. It wasn't enough. If Izuku stopped right then and there, his father would be okay. He'd probably need a hospital visit, but he'd be okay, and then he'd hurt Izuku even more, and he'd hurt his mother, and it was perfectly fine to hurt Izuku. He didn't care because everyone had made it a point that it didn't matter if he was hurt. His mother was something else entirely. Izuku didn't care what happened to him, but what made Hisashi think it was okay to hurt her? What gave him the confidence to lay a hand on his mother? Nothing would be done, though, if he left Hisashi as he was. He'd just keep on hurting his mother. This is only the beginning. Izuku couldn't allow that. Everything had just stopped being so loud and hurting, and he had his father on the floor and... Oh! His father's broken hands grabbed his throat, and Izuku has never truly remembered smashing the bat into Hisashi's throat more than the first time. But then it clicked in his head that his father couldn't scream, and if he got rid of him, then he'd never be able to hurt anyone ever again. But 11-year-old little boys don't ever think about how they're going to murder their parents, so they don't know the quickest, most effective way to get rid of parents. But Izuku knew one thing and one thing only. Something can't live without its head. So, he brings the bat down on Hisashi's head and he hears him choke, because Izuku's already made sure he can't scream. Because he already made it so Izuku can't even beg anyone for help. And he brings it down again, because Hisashi is still awake, and then again, and again, and the world has gone red, and all he knows is that he has to keep going. Otherwise, Hisashi is going to hurt his mother again, and he can't let that happen ever again. I can't do this, Kachan. Togata didn't intend on eavesdropping on his junior, but when Sir had confirmed what exactly Chisaki's relation to Eri was, and what they knew for certain the Yakuza had been doing to that little girl, he left the room pale as a sheet. So of course Togata was going to find a fursuit to make sure he wasn't throwing up somewhere unattended. But he stopped short in the doorway of the break room when he saw Midoriya stood talking on the phone, head tilted back and eyes closed as he ran a hand through his hair, talking to someone on the phone with a tone of desperation. It wasn't until he heard another kid on the phone that he realized the call was on speakerphone. Keep your shit organized, Izuku. What can't you do? The other speaker grunted, and the rustle of fabric came through the speaker, and Midoriya stopped, running his hand through his hair, and put his head in his hands, before taking in a shaking breath. They want me on the team to rescue Eri, but I can't. He's like a worse version of him, and it's all I can see. Togata feels his own legs squeeze when he realizes Midoriya is crying, and he's determined to go across the room and comfort his junior when the words from the other students stall his movements entirely. He's dead, Izuku. He can't hurt you anymore. You said you weren't going to let him control you anymore. You're in control now, and only you got it, shithead. The curse is almost affectionate. Now there's a little girl who's got her worst nightmare keeping her trapped in a living hell, and guess what, genius? You're not a weak kid anymore, but that little girl? She's not strong enough to get out, and not everyone can do what you did. So are you going to be her hero or not? Togata asks Aizawa Sensei if something happened to Midoriya when he was a kid, purely so he knows if he needs to watch out for anything in the case. And the news that Midoriya's father was murdered doesn't sit right anyway with the thought that a kid had to watch that happen. But he's even more uneasy when he remembers what the other kid said. Not everyone can do what you did. And given that according to Aizawa they think a vigilante got into the house and killed a man, Togata finds himself wondering if 11-year-old Midoriya Izuku was the one to let that vigilante into their house that night. The alternative knocks his stomach, so he elects to ignore it. Eri is so little in his arms that it's terrifying. Technically, he shouldn't be here. The little girl isn't supposed to have any human connection outside of hospital staff, until she can control her quirk properly. But Izuku knows what it's like to be free from the thing that's haunted your every sleeping and waking movement, and then he's shoved aside and left walking alone. It's soul-crushing. It feels like going cold turkey because you're so overexposed to the feeling of being unsafe and constantly on guard and terrified that knowing you don't have that anymore, but not knowing who is safe and why you've just been shoved to the side and forgotten about makes things 1,000 times worse than it has to be. And Izuku gets that. And Izuku knows that Eri won't hurt him with her quirk because Eri has seen that her quirk won't hurt him. So he doesn't feel bad about sneaking into her hospital room and sitting next to her on the bed, smiling at her as she latches onto him because he knows she won't hurt him and he knows how much everything right now must hurt. Eri has her head buried into his chest, tiny little arms. His blood boils when he thinks of the scars and bruises hidden under fresh bandages, shaking as they grab onto him, and he feels her tears soaking his shirt, and all he does is curl in and ask to keep her closer and run a hand through her hair. It's my fault. It's my fault he's dead. If I didn't have my curse. She hiccups and fumbles over her words for a few minutes before getting them out again. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. He lets her cry, lets her shout, and blame herself, and then he moves his hand so he can rub her back and move her slowly away from him, so she can see his face, and it's when her eyes meet him that he speaks. You didn't hurt anyone. Eri doesn't believe him, and he knows why, but it doesn't stop him. Chisaki hurt people. Chisaki hurt Night Eye. You did nothing wrong. But if I didn't have my quirk... If you didn't have your quirk, you wouldn't be you. Eri pauses. Quirks make you who you are, but they also don't define you. You're you because of your quirk. That isn't all you are. But Chisaki said that I was only important because of my curse. What else am I? What do you want to be? He doesn't have power over you anymore. You're in control now.